Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, in my continuing education to point out excellent material that gives you a very Gnostic view of things, or in a very alternative, and one of them is the fantastic film, as I cover many films, and movies can be a great teaching aid. You know, many, many years ago, they used to laugh at the media because nothing really serious came out of them, as a general rule. This has changed in recent times, and in 1988, a great film came out called The Apprentice to Murder, with starring Donald Southerland and Chad Lowe. Now, this was an excellent film covering a real case that happened in Pennsylvania. I'm trying to remember the exact date that this murder took place, and it's been documented in the paper. This was a famous trial of the powwow doctors, that they used to call them. And of course, the community that was misnamed, as so many of these communities are misnamed, called the Pennsylvania Dutch. Actually, this happened in the 1920s. Very fascinating case. And I find the whole powwow 1920s magical system. This is the last magical system that was kept going by the general, what would you call, Caucasian public. While the voodoo traditions have continued up to present day with the black community, most, particularly religious people, have rejected any of these kind of spiritual things to a degree. But to a large extent, this powwow stuff, which really connects to those, what I call voodoo practitioners like Betty Hinn and all these guys on TV taking in the Holy Ghost and all that goes with it. So it's not really all that gone, but they, of course, want to claim that everything that comes from a particular good source. But the Pennsylvania Dutch, and again, they were mislabeled with their Hexencraft. Of course, Hexen means witchcraft in Deutsche. And the bottom line is that these people were never Dutch. They were always German. And the problem and the misnomer comes from is that Germans don't call themselves Germans. They call them Deutschlanders. So the primitive Southern American ears changed Deutschland, kind of a difficult Persian word, into what would be thought of as Dutch, and which, of course, now the Dutchy people call themselves Nederlanders. But Dutch is a common term used at that time. So a lot of the times when you hear that term Dutch, is wrong, because people just don't understand where you come from. Deutschland, what you mean Dutchland? So this is, of course, how so many people were called Dutch when they actually. So another cover-up, particularly all part of this evil agenda coming from that part of the world, but that's another story. So this was the last practice, unless you get into a lot of the spiritualism that still carries on today in, quote, Christian church. Now, the Pennsylvania Dutch were basically Christians. And, of course, they read the German Bible, they speak German, etc. And that's their entire community. I think most of us, a classic example would be the Amish. So, and you would think it would be funny that they would use this kind of things. But even in certain areas of Islam, there is a magical context to them. And there are magical glyphs and symbols in certain Islamic, I'm not sure which one of the two Islamic sects allow this, but there are books, and I have some books where they have some very interesting symbols that Islam uses. So it's not that much. So the Hexencraft and so forth, where they have actual images, which they put together sigils that they would paint on the side of their barns, etc., to keep away evil spirits, bring prosperity, etc. Goes on to this day. And you can find information on this on the web, and there are books written about it. And I think it's really fascinating. And what really happened is that these techniques turned into the Book of Powwows, which was the famous book, which again, you can get online for free, which had these little prayers of a, quote, magical nature calling on the divinity of God and Jesus to help people. So these were pretty much native healers. And this movie gives you a great insight into it. Oddly, this movie was financed and filmed entirely in Norway. Why? That's weird. But it would be typical that Hollywood wouldn't film something like this, but certainly had a top cast in it. I've always liked the kind of weirdo Donald Southerland, who plays the Hexen or the powwow main master who's teaching Chad Lowe, his apprentice. And it shows how these people at this time in the 1920s, and this is was happening with the voodoo hoodoo people as well, is that they were being persecuted by the local sheriffs because they were practicing medicine without a license. And this is when things started to come down on these people, and it was a great way of getting them was to do that. And they would go and try and heal people. And of course, like everything else, many times, like with the regular doctors do, they would fail. But if you die from a regular doctor, that's okay. He got paper that says he doctor. If you die from a person who is spiritual, there is a problem. So this movie goes into a lot of it. It's a very fascinating movie of what was going on there and how this murder case, which basically was a battle between two magicians, the powwow doctor. And again, you get that powwow, look it up on there. You can get that book for free online. It's everywhere. Actually got into a magical battle. And what is interesting about this film is it shows the perspective of how this doctor looked at what was going on and how regular society looked at what was going on. Very, very interesting. And again, remember, this is based on a real case. And from what I can tell from my reading, the movie is fairly correct. And of course, you got to remember, movies have to change a wee bit to make it understandable in their very brief format. But I think this gives an excellent, excellent perspective of this, including the social stigma against being a faith healer in the community and in general, of how this was looked down upon by the community. I'm assuming that this is relatively true. So, just as many of these faith healers are looked down upon by the cult of Christianity, who hates everybody except their own little niche. So these people are highly criticized. And what is the actual... Because this is very fascinating, because this is in our... this is in the 20th century. We're talking about 1920. Or is that the 19th century? But you're talking about 100 years ago, and these practices still go on today. And it shows the feedback. I mean, here's a guy who's very sincere, trying to do his craft. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with sick people, they tend to die. So you get people that hate you. What is the reality of these things? There is, of course, and this is something I would love to research, what was the success rate of this? Now, it states in the old books on powwow and other things, which is an interesting term, of how originally they did similar rituals and were able to stop bleeding, etc. And these rituals used to be in the names of the old gods. And then, of course, they changed into the new gods, which is interesting as well. So you're not dealing on a particular power. You're dealing on this connection to whatever this power is to heal people, etc. And they've been claimed to heal people of most anything. And what I find very fascinating is that they claim to be able to stop bleeding. This is pretty fascinating. Of course, bleeding is a terrible thing, particularly in olden days, back in the time, back in the day, because you would bleed to death. So this is quite fascinating. As I said, this comes into modern times, as does hoodoo and voodoo, which I've studied as well. And what kind of power did they have? Again, it's all illusionary. We just don't really know. Did this energy really help a lot of people or not? Studying the hoodoo doctors, it was found out that a hoodoo doctor was getting a lot of people out of the draft. And people were thinking this was some magical conjuration. When what really happened, which still makes them their native doctors, which is, of course, what the powwow doctor is in this. He's a native doctor, using symbols and herbs and other things. But what they did was the fact that it was so smart, this hoodoo man, is that he actually gave these people a little bit of poison before they went for their health check for getting drafted. So, and this messed them up to that if you had this poison, of course, if you gave them too much, it would kill them, which never seemed to be the case, but certainly got a lot of people out of the draft. It's amusing that they want to draft American Indians and black people to fight for a country that's done nothing but torture them. And that's your government. You don't get nothing except you can die for it, or even worse, you can die for foreigners with NATO. Woo-hoo. So the whole idea is that all these things are quite amusing in modern times. So it wasn't really magic, but was it really not magic? If you're using a substance and you're smart enough that this actually works, well, do you actually think that energetic spells and stuff are going to cause this to happen in a physical way? Well, you know, getting somebody rejected, which would need physical evidence from the draft, is not going to be overly easily done through magic, or probably hardly done at all. So what are you going to do? Certain things can happen, and as has happened in things like this, but I'm not going to drag this on. But anybody who's interested in any form of metaphysical and alternative must watch this film. This film, is not very well known. It probably is going to be difficult. I was able to buy a copy of it on CD myself. But this is a fascinating, and what this film does is very well produced here, very well done. Particularly, it was filmed entirely in Norway, who, again, gave all the financing to get this thing done. I think it was a $10 million budget. So somebody wanted to get this done, and maybe they had ancestors that came over here that were connected to that community as well. Even though, again, as I said, Norwegians are not Pennsylvania Dutch, and they're not Germans per se either. So Norway is Northern Europe. Germany is Central Europe. People don't understand that either. But there's your... Did you learn something today, Mr. Beale? So the whole idea is that we have all the things that go with that. So, very fast. But the film goes into the person's common reality. Looking at this person. And again, it's based on real stories. They even talk about what happened to these two people, how this guy was eventually imprisoned and everything else. But it shows you the view of the common reality. Well, you're just nuts. This guy isn't doing anything to you. You're living in a fantasy world. To the magical mind, you said, this guy is sending evil energy to me. So, and this is what's going on. And I run into this, of course, all the time. And this happens constantly. And you got to remember, most of these evil practitioners are hiding behind their Christian religion, the little cult they belong in. They go to church every Sunday, and you're normal people coming home and murdering children, killing animals, getting into deviant sex acts, molesting children. Yeah, but I go to church every Sunday. I'm a good Christian. Well, I guess you would be a good Christian, because that's part of what they do. But the whole idea is that very, very interesting, and the film was extremely well done with this. It also shows the problem that his apprentice had with training under him. All the things we're still going under today. Very, very interesting. But for the actual way this was so well written and so well produced, shows you the two different realities. The reality of common common world, which is worthless to the magical mind and the magical reality that goes with that. Quite fascinating. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the in-depth of the story. It's very well told in this film, and everybody should hunt this film up. Again, when you get into these films, this is going to be very difficult to find unless you go out and try and buy it. And I'm sure it's not in print any longer, meaning that you can just go someplace and get it. So it's going to take a little hunting. You're going to have to go to eBay and other places to try and find this old film. Very worth, and I'm assuming it's not too expensive. It's always difficult to copy these and put them up somewhere, but for selected Patreon and All Access members, but I will try and do this in the future. There's a few other classic films like this, and I want to go into all this because I think learning by film is very potent. It allows you to relax and to a certain extent take in the information. You have to be careful because most movies, because of a very short time period, and, you know, people don't want to sit past 90 minutes anyway. You make a long film, people always criticize that. Me gotta go to the bathroom. Is there some more crap I can stuff in my mouth? You know, these are the things you run into if things go past an hour and a half. But you can't let that stop people. But as a training film, and they show actual sigils that they use and actual procedures that were done by these powwow men. So this is very informative, and what I can tell without getting into intricacies, and everything's a little bit different, but the film is very accurate of what happened. And as I said, it's a rare thing. The average public sees things as this is just a nut. He murdered this guy. While as a magical person said, well, what was really going on here? Who was this person? And that is actually shown. And it's shown how society rejects this and how if you go on a particular alternative path, how they will reject you. Very, very fascinating how all this works. So this is one of those classic of all classics, and this can pertain to anybody who's doing anything alternative, whether you're a scalar energy practitioner, whether you're dealing with some sort of energetic magic or magic in general. You know, magic, as we like to call it today, is just old science. This is a science. And these people were given credit, and they were able to make money from because their stuff worked. How much does it work? Are you able to pray over a bleeding wound and stop the bleeding? This is something that has been stated to be the case. Now, as there is in all, quote, mythology, there's always a great amount of truth to it as well. And again, all this stuff is hidden, and this film really shows you how it's hidden. If you go out, you cannot be practicing medicine without a license. This is how they went after all the hoodoo people in the South as well. There was a push on there because there wasn't much you can do about people doing spells and stuff, even though, by the way, that's illegal and still is in many countries. Like it is in the UK, you can't have a seance. It's illegal in the UK to have a seance up to this day. So the whole idea is, and there are laws in most states against doing rituals or witchcraft. This is a problem even with the person I knew who had an occult store, and most occult stores make their money from doing rituals. In San Francisco, of all places, the hippy-dippy land, well, the local, of course, vice squad from the local unlaw enforcement people came in and blackmailed them, and they had to pay them off. Thank you, Coppers. So this is what goes on. So, you know, spellcasting may not be legal. And this is something, again, that should be made a federal issue to legalize it everywhere in the country. But we can't even legalize marijuana thanks to all them liberals and, you know, them presidents and the Congress. All they can do is take money and give them to Nazis. Thank you, Congress. So the whole idea is that all of that goes on there, we have to be very, very informed of. But this is a fantastic movie. So do whatever it takes to get a copy of this. This is something you should watch often. I don't know where you can find this. I don't know if Netflix has something like this. But when you get into these rare things, and of course it does have a top actor in it, Donald Southerland. So it should be something that maybe you can find in some way. So that's part of your challenge as well. Those who find it should have it. Those that don't, shouldn't. That's how life really works, isn't it? Or is that just fantasy thinking? So the whole idea is that this is a fantastic training tool and gives you an insight into something that is 20th century, or what is it? I can say that's still 19th century or whatever it is. However, we got to, that's what the scientists do. Well, 18 is really 17, 19 is, let's keep it more confusing. Let's use Latin words. Woo-hoo! Yeah, I love that Latin. So the whole idea is that we get into looking at, but as I said, this is so well done. It just shows you the magical type of thinking that any type of person who has ascended past the common filth of society into the higher thinking, the higher self, exactly perceives things. Life is not how it appears. Plain and simple. And I don't know how much of this still goes on, but of course in certain areas of Pennsylvania, Deutschland, you can still see barns with these hexen signs on it, which show you different, they're basically sigils that are supposed to create certain energies. I always found those, they're fairly attractive, but they don't seem to have much energy in my book. But you can get books on this. It's still out there. There's a fair amount of information out there. And of course, the powwow, book of powwows that all of these priests used is in public domain. It's free and it can be easily found. So do check this out. Fantastic, one-of-a-kind type movie, and you're never going to find this information anywhere else.